Dying in board games is stupid. I mean, it depends on the context, of course, but dying in board games is stupid. Hard resets are stupid. Now, if you're wondering what I'm talking about, that's absolutely fair. I don't mean losing. Losing is a very real concept that makes sense, but there's a difference between losing and just having your progress completely reset. Now let's take a step back and talk about the kinds of games I'm referring to. Games like Tainted Grail, games like Seventh Continent, games like, I'd have to think through a bunch more, but many other games out there that to some degree give you a degree of just death is the final point. Death is it. It's over. You've done your thing, and now you just have to reset the entire scenario starting from the get-go. And I think it's a concept that some people will want, and it's a concept that we should certainly entertain for those who want it, but I think it's an interesting concept that makes no sense and doesn't have a proper correlation in video games. You see, we have this perception, we have this interesting perception in board games, a perception that makes sense to me that we have, because I have it too instinctively, but it's the idea that, well, you have to have a failure point. If you can't fail, what's the point of continuing? What's the point of engaging in this experience if you can't just die and then not move forward? But it's a concept that doesn't actually make sense. It doesn't have it's a concept we've applied to board games, even though it doesn't necessarily need to be there. If you think of video games, most video games, and Dark Souls games, or so any game that has a specific mode in which you could have eternal death is a different concept, but usually those are modes you turn on. When you're playing through video games and you have this concept of eternal death, you have this concept of, well, when I die, it's over and I have to play the entire game from start. That's usually a setting, a difficulty mode, something that players have to actively engage with because it's not something that's fun, and video games and board games are designed to be fun. More often than not, the way video games work is you go forward, you try to achieve the thing, and you go ahead, and maybe eventually your character dies, and then you start again at the beginning of the level. You don't start the entire game again, you start again at the beginning of the level. You start again with a reasonable degree of progression that is and is not lost. The concept of save points exists in video games left, right, and center. Do you know why? Because it makes the game fun. Of course you want difficulty in games. Difficulty is inherent. That's a good thing in engines of any kind, because without difficulty, there's no sense of accomplishment as you move forward within the game. That sense of accomplishment, that sense of difficulty is also why some people who are hardcore enough about experiences will turn those settings on that, oh my gosh, if I ever die, it's over, it's done with, and I have to start again from the beginning. Because it gives a degree of accomplishment given the nature of the difficulty involved. For some people. For most people, that just turns the experience into a grind. That just turns the experience into a place and a game that people don't want to be there. More often than not, you have save points. In particularly brutal games, your save points are spread out far apart. In particularly brutal games, you have to start the entire level again, but just the level. You ever play Call of Duty? You ever play Battlefield? You ever play any of these games where you're going on some sort of adventure? When you die, you simply have to try the thing that made you die again. That's all you have to do. You have to try the thing that made you die. You don't reset your progress, pack it all up, and 8 hours of work is gone, and only now you have to continue. That's not how video games function. We have a lot of people playing video games, a lot of people creating video games, and they collectively acknowledged that death and a lack of progress isn't satisfying, it's frustrating. And yet some board games, not many of them, but some board games that have these longer adventure type scenarios attached to them often attach some sort of death or failure mechanic in place in a way that is punishing, that is frustrating, that could have hours of your life lost in a way that is simply not satisfying. But again, that's the exception. That's not what should be happening. That's not how things should progress. When you're playing a game of Seventh Continent, if death is going to result in 7 hours of lost time, maybe don't do it that way. Maybe when you die, you simply reset to the last possible save point you can create. Whether you have to house rule it or not, figure out a way that doesn't result in hours of your life being wasted. But also should still result in a degree of challenge. You want to have that binary back and forth. I mean, first of all, the challenge is up to you. If you have a sense of progression and you're simply happy with moving forward as is, call it a day, move forward as is, who really cares? But if you need a sense of challenge, figure out a way to give yourself some sort of save point. Figure out a way to give yourself some sort of concept of how to move forward and how to progress while still not losing hours and hours of your life because you died. This is why I cheat in solo games. Not in competitive games. In competitive games, cheating would be bad. That's frowned upon. In cooperative games, I have to be on the same page with the person next to me that we both want to cheat entirely. And it's usually the exception because more often than not, when I'm playing those types of games cooperatively, when I'm playing games cooperatively, more often than not, they are single shot games. Where losing is fine. I don't feel like I lost the progress and I have to go to the next thing and reset. If I'm playing Cthulhu Death May Die and I lost the scenario, I lost the scenario. Who cares? I don't have to play the scenario again if I don't want to. I can choose to if I want to. I can go to the next one if I want to. That is all completely up to me. Even a game like Gloomhaven. If you're playing through Gloomhaven and you lose the scenario, and obviously you don't have this freedom if you're playing it digitally, but if you're playing it physically, if you're playing Gloomhaven physically and you lose a scenario and you retry the scenario and you lose it again, do you know when you should retry it? Even that first retry, you should only do it if you want to. Games are meant to be fun. Games are meant to be something that gives you enjoyment. And if you enjoy the process of replaying something, by all means do so. But if you don't enjoy the process of replaying it, pretend you won, give yourself the necessary experience points, give yourself the necessary whatever, and move on to the next mission. Games are meant to be fun, and if you're not cheating against another player, if you're not involving some degree of deception, if you're not involving some degree of other players not being on the same table as far as what is happening, as long as there's no deceit involved, make the game fun for you. Make the game fun for your group. Some people will enjoy playing that same scenario in Gloomhaven 7 times because they have to beat it and they want to beat it fairly. They're not going to adjust the difficulty. They're just going to play the scenario. Others don't want to play it a single time. Others, like myself, probably find myself in the middle category. A single reshot, absolutely no problem. I die again, and we'll just go ahead and fudge it and call it a day because I want to move forward, I want to make progress, and games are supposed to be fun. Dying in board games is stupid. It's a stupid concept that I think people created because they felt this idea, the sense of, well, of course you have to have a failure point. What's the point in trying if you don't? That's why, like a game like RuneScape Kingdoms, I believe, from Steamforged Games, they recently had their own game, RuneScape Kingdoms, and they had this concept of you just move forward and you keep doing the thing. You fail the final boss fight, you reset, and you continue again. You don't fail the game, because what's the point of that? Why do we want to give you a 3-hour experience in which you can actually fail it at the end? No, you failed the boss fight. Reset, try again. Reset, try again. You need to have challenge in games. That's a different conversation. You need to have something that is difficult, something that you have to struggle to get through. Maybe you have to figure out a way to level up, to gather the right gear, to try the right combination of things. That's all part of the fun. Spending 7 hours getting to the point where you can make those decisions again, a little bit less so. And so whenever I play a solo game that involves the decision point as far as, do I continue moving forward? Do I reset? Do I cheat? The answer is almost always that I'm willing to cheat. Removing grind from an experience will improve the experience for me. Removing things that make the experience less fun will improve the experience for me. The balance and the reason I don't like house ruling my own games is because very often it is harder to house rule a game in a way that has been playtested, in a way that has been ensured to be correct. I've effectively become my own developer of the game when that happens. And that means that a simple solution to a problem can result in a cascading set of the law of unintended consequences. I solve one problem, but it only creates another. Maybe the difficulty is no longer there because the game was balanced around death as being the difficulty factor. The problem is that death came with 3 hours of lost time, which I wasn't interested in. And so sometimes when I'm playing solo games, I will house rule a situation. I'll house rule an aspect of the game in order to make the experience better. But in doing so, I'll also kill the experience for me. I've had both happen. I've had times where house ruling made the experience better in one way, but made it worse in another. But I've also had times where house ruling the experience simply made it better. And I've had times where house ruling the experience simply made it worse. I'm not here to become my own game developer. If I want to develop my own game, I'll develop my own game. I'm not here to ideally house rule a game. I'm willing to, but I understand just as easily that house ruling a game doesn't necessarily solve the problem. I would like the idea that we in terms of the tabletop hobby, I'd like the idea that we get past death as a concept that needs to be implemented. Difficulty, yes. Some degree of save point or reset, sure. You need to have something in place that it feels like a challenge and it feels like progress. But death and losing hours and hours of your life should be an optional thing that people sign up for as opposed to the default experience provided by the publisher. None of this actually matters significantly, and this problem is not that large. It only affects a handful of games, but I thought it'd be an interesting conversation because I just think that we treat board games differently than video games when we're talking about the nature of death and where losing permanently is an inherent expected facet versus something that is just not really known. In video games, we don't have the concept of losing permanently. You have to sign up for that. The rest of the time, you simply load your save point and continue from where you left off. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Quack&Co, where less time watching means more time playing.